reports. Listen for 5-minute audio reports on the biggest winners and losers in the stock market. Subscribe to Stock Movers on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you listen. Let's head over now to Washington, D.C. and check in with Nathan Dean. He is Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Policy Analyst to kind of wrap up the year that was in 2025 and look ahead to 2026, because you can't overstate just how much of an influence politics and policy had on the markets this year.
Clients actually demand access to Nathan Dean, and his notes get huge readership because politics definitely impacts investments.
I mean, you just look at the crypto space, for instance. Look at the financial space, the banking space. Nathan, thank you so much for joining us today on the eve of Christmas Eve. Which industries saw the biggest impact, for better or for worse, from policy?
So obviously, I think the first thing to do is look at President Trump's one big beautiful bill, and really that's clean energy. You know, we saw a lot of the tax credits curtailed in terms of just both solar and wind, and both industries are really significantly being felt in terms of, you know, those actions. I would also say is there's a lot of sentiment out there in terms of crypto and financial services, like you just said. But 2026 is going to bring even more deregulation for those two sectors. And that's why we think for 2026, crypto and financial services in particular are going to see quite a benefit. Just in the banking space, for example, you know, back of the napkin math, because we haven't seen some proposals that haven't come out yet, but we're estimating around $73 to $75 billion in capital that will be returned to the big banks. So think of Bank of America, JP Morgan, and Citigroup. And then in the crypto space, obviously, you know, we have some stablecoin legislation passed that is now going to be implemented in 2026. But also we see Congress debating this crypto market structure bill, which we think is a 70% chance of success passing in the first half of next year, which would then bring regulatory clarity for firms like Coinbase and Robinhood.
It's also an election year in 2026. How does that impact how legislation gets passed or doesn't pass? How's that work?
Yeah, so, you know, for 2026, every day that all 435 members of the House and 33 members of the Senate are here, it's a day that their opponent is back home campaigning against them. And look, they don't want to be here. So we're telling our clients is that legislation is going to be very difficult to come by in 2026. Now, the Republicans want to have another bite of what's called the reconciliation apple. This is essentially the one big beautiful bill pathway again. So think of this as going to be more healthcare related. We're somewhat bearish on this just because the margins of the House of Representatives are pretty thin right now. And look, if it was easy, they would have already done it, they being the Republicans. But there are some other bills out there, like I mentioned, the crypto bill. But 2026 is a story about deregulation, because regulators live here, they don't go home, and they're going to be working on these rules. And it's also a story of tariffs, because we do anticipate that the Supreme Court in January is most likely going to say that President Trump's IEEPA tariffs are unlawful. And then the Trump administration is going to have to figure out another way to implement these tariffs, because just as of this morning, President Trump said that these are really good things for the nation.
Yeah, that's going to be something we're going to really focus in on in 2026. If the Supreme Court does rule against the president, what does that mean for the efforts by importers to claim a refund or to try to get back some of that money?
You know, so Bloomberg News had a column a couple of weeks ago, and they used the term refund chaos. And I love that two-word phrase, because that's just going to show you how difficult it will be to get refunds. Because to the best of our knowledge, it's not like one company like Amazon could go to and just say, look, give me a check for $500 million. You have to go down to the line item by each individual line item, because each individual line item has certain tariffs associated with it. So it's going to be messy. And there's also no way we can figure that there would be an electronic version of this wire. It would have to be a paper check. So I think there's a lot of folks out there saying, look, if the refunds are coming, it's going to be quarters, if not years. And I would just say is that, you know, the other thing to keep in mind is that the Trump administration most likely will launch these investigations. So if you hear in the press, you see Section 232 or Section 301, think investigation. But those investigations take time. And the biggest question that we have, and we don't have this answer yet, is, will President Trump reimpose these tariffs 3, 4, 5 months before the elections when they're extremely unpopular with the populace?
Jeez, I mean, that's going to be crazy to see how that plays out. What else here, Nathan? Is the expectation in Washington that the Democrats will win back the House, perhaps?
So it's certainly looking that way. I mean, just go historically, and the minority party has always done extremely well. I mean, think of President Obama, the Tea Party comes in. Think of President Trump, Nancy Pelosi becomes Speaker of the House. So historically, that would suggest that the momentum goes back towards the Democrats. But we've seen, in Virginia, New Jersey, Miami, New York City, that the Democrats are performing much better than they would have even just within that historical norm. And we've seen a lot of retirements from the Republican side as we head into these midterms. Now, if you think of how do the midterms actually impact the investing side, I would say is one, it takes away the opportunity for this reconciliation method again. So think in 2027, you're not going to see a very large tax cut bill or a deficit inducing bill. It brings things back down to gridlock. I'm not saying nothing can get done, but it just means that legislation is going to be less of an emphasis, and President Trump to implement policy is going to focus more on executive orders and then the deregulatory method.
Is there any appetite, Nathan, in Washington to address AI and to set up some more standard guidelines for companies to operate in? I mean, I think about NVIDIA and how it's the poster child of the AI revolution here in the US. And Jensen Huang has pretty much gotten everything he wanted.
Yeah, so President Trump issued an executive order on artificial intelligence, essentially combating the state's abilities to create their own rules on AI. Now, our legal analyst, Matt Shenholm, has looked at it and said most likely this would not pass court muster, so that AI executive order probably doesn't have much teeth to it. But in that executive order, President Trump also directed the executive branch to come up with a national standard. And so if we see the executive branch and the various agencies come out and say, look, this is what we think the national standard should look like, at least it's an area for debate, a foundation, if you will, for Congress to begin to start thinking about this. Because right now it's a very hands-off industry in terms of regulation. I didn't talk about it in 2025 because there really isn't all that much regulation for it. But if this foundation and this debate continues, and you will see a lot of anti-data center messaging as we get into the 2026 midterms here in Northern Virginia, we saw it already in our election. You are going to see this come into the political spectrum. So I do think over 2026, you'll see this debate. But again, I don't think you're going to see anything actually put down on a piece of paper and say this is what the national standard is.
All right, Nathan Dean, very good. Appreciate it. As always, Nathan Dean, Senior Policy Analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. He's based down there in Washington, D.C. Earlier this morning, around 8:30 Wall Street time, we got another piece